My name's Sarah Merrington. I am on the board of directors for AVM, which stands for Association of Volunteer Managers, and I'm a lifelong volunteer manager myself.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your experience of being a volunteer manager.
So I've been a volunteer manager for about 20 years. Initially started off in universities, running sort of sport tournaments and events for students and staff. I've worked for local councils and charities, running sort of community physical activity and health programs, particularly working with volunteers in deprived communities. And then for the last 7 years, I've been working for more environmental sustainability charities, people like Cycling UK and CPRE, the Countryside Charity, leading their volunteering teams. And then I guess finally, I started last week in a new role for RSPCA as their branch director for the local branch down in Kent. And yes, again, working with volunteers. So it's always been a really major part of my work.
And what about the Association of Volunteer Managers, which is, as you say, you're a trustee for? How did you get involved with them?
Well, I've been a member and a volunteer of AVM for 3 years and on the board for 2. And I initially joined them after attending their annual conference, which is once a year in October. In fact, we just had it a couple of weeks ago. And at that point, I think like many people, I was a solo volunteer manager in a charity, which meant effectively you're doing everything, aren't you, from strategy to managing the volunteers on the ground. And for me, it was just this amazing opportunity to meet people who were just like me, fellow volunteer managers in positions that were quite isolated, coming together and sharing experiences. As well as meeting other people who'd perhaps been there and done it and come out the other side and had really worked with their organisations to invest in volunteer management. So loads to learn from those people. And absolutely, it's a community, if you like, of volunteer managers, I guess, much like your group. It's really enabled me to expand my network of people I can go to for advice and support. And I think partly, the type of person who is attracted to volunteer managers, they are also exceptionally willing to exchange their ideas and their tools and give that support. So I love that about what I do generally as a career, and I love that about AVM.
Maybe I got this the wrong way around, but perhaps we should have talked about what the Association of Volunteer Managers is first.
Yeah, I'll do that as well. So effectively, we are an independent membership body, and we aim to support, represent and champion people in volunteer management. We're across the UK, and we are regardless of sector, so it doesn't have to be charitable sector. We also represent people working in corporate responsibility, for example, or in universities running alumni programs. So we've got very big range of members. We are definitely, as I mentioned, a community. So our whole purpose is about connecting people and offering opportunities to share expertise and support. So we're not a training organisation. And we do that by running engagement events to bring people together. We do loads of sort of online resources. And we're also an advocacy organisation for the profession of volunteer management with government. We work really closely with NCVA, for example. We've got about 500 members. But as with most organisations, a very small organising team, so just 2 part-time staff, the board, and some really amazing volunteers. So yes, it's all hands on deck for when you volunteer for AVM. Lots of work to do.
Well, 2020 has been a strange year for everybody, and particularly within volunteering. So what kind of changes have you seen this year?
It's been a real eye-opener, hasn't it? So I guess there's a few things that come to mind. So firstly, there has been this humongous increase in informal volunteering, people really stepping up to the plate to support their community and their neighbours, really coming together to support each other through the pandemic. That's, for me as a long-standing volunteer manager, it's really heartwarming. And also on a personal note, I've actually found that some people are a bit more aware of the need for volunteer managers as a result of that. And when I was spent many years explaining what I do to people and people looking at me fairly blankly. I'm sure you've had the same. And people seem to understand my work a little bit more now, which is nice. But obviously alongside that, many of the formal volunteering opportunities haven't been able to continue. And that's been a huge issue for organisations that I've worked for and many others. And also obviously the well-being of our individual volunteers who haven't been able to complete their roles. I'm just trying to think of some real big things that have kind of struck me about the time lockdown, and obviously we're going into another lockdown now. But I guess the first thing that springs to mind is the range of innovation opportunities, or the things that volunteers and managers have done to change their roles so quickly. So, for example, I was speaking to my fellow board member, Angela, recently, and she was talking to me about a volunteer-led community cafe supporting adults with learning disabilities to get work experience. And they obviously had to close their doors at lockdown and they weren't able to offer their usual service. But within a week, they turned it around to being a food bank site for their local community. And that's partly what I love about volunteers, their ability to really kind of think on their feet and change what they do, and their drive to support their community, whichever part of the community they are supporting, is so big that they always have these really amazing ideas about how they can carry on, making a difference. And then the other thing, so for most of lockdown, I was working for CPRE, the countryside charity, and we have the average age of our volunteers is 72, probably much like many other organisations. And what I really liked about lockdown is that many of our older volunteers actually totally proved everyone wrong when people said that they wouldn't engage online. They've really kind of challenged themselves and they've embraced it. And I think they would say as well that they've made more connections or improved their connections better than they ever have before. So for us as an organisation, for CPRE, it's this really big opportunity to support them even more than we've been able to, because now we've supported them to get online. We can now continue that. So it's a really good thing to come out of lockdown, that there's almost been more connection because of that.
I think a lot of people here in the Nottinghamshire Leaders of Volunteers Network will recognise that flexibility and certainly that transition to a heck of a lot more volunteering that's happening remotely, whether that be online or on the phone. But the Association of Volunteer Managers itself, how's the association adapted to the situation?
Yeah, I mean, like all organisations, it has been challenging. From a business perspective, from a membership perspective. So many of our members, to start off with, were on furlough. Volunteer managers obviously were one of the first employees to go, really, unfortunately. And so we wanted to be able to support those furloughed volunteer managers. So we did things like setting up online networking opportunities for them still to be able to come together and share their experiences, even though they weren't working. And then obviously that also left lots of very stressed volunteer managers behind who were carrying on, but probably doing lots more jobs than they were previously doing. So we ran live networking chats on a variety of topics, again, just for them to kind of share what they were doing. So an example was Volunteers Week. How did you move Volunteers Week from being something that was quite face-to-face to something that was online? We had loads of interested in the sessions we ran around that, just people coming together to talk about all their different ideas, basically. We've had to change our pricing as well to support those out of work now. Obviously, unfortunately, now people are starting to lose their jobs. It's a really challenging time for everyone. And we've done things like start up a summary database with all the volunteer management or related jobs, so people can try and, everything's in one place and they can find roles easily. Like all people, we mostly did face-to-face events. So we've moved all those online, naturally. And we had our first online conference. And then we've done other things like we've got an initiative called AVM Connect, which randomly matches you with other volunteer managers for a chat. We've also running things called AVM Bite Size, which are sort of pre-recorded webcasts on a variety of topics, interviewing other volunteer managers to share that experience. So we've tried to be really innovative, move everything online as much as possible. But we have found that, again, loads more people have been connecting in when they wouldn't necessarily have done that before, because they wouldn't have been able to travel to the face-to-face event. So again, like we were talking about for the volunteers themselves, it has brought everybody together more.
Well, thank heavens for online. It's the reason that you're able to be with us here today,
Yes.
isn't it? You talked about the annual conference a couple of times. I know that was just only a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it? What happened?
So yes, online for the first time ever. It's usually in London for a day in October. So we ran a 2-day event instead. We had over 200 people attend. I have never run an online event with that many people before. And the AVM team, Joe and the rest of the team, we had an organising committee that they did an absolutely amazing job. So, as I mentioned, there were so many more new people around the table, either members or non-members. Non-members can join our conference, and they wouldn't normally be able to go. I guess the time or the cost of travelling down to London's too much. So it was really good to see lots of new people there. And then in terms of content, we always try and have a mixture of experts from outside the sector to bring in sort of new ideas, new ways of working into volunteer management, but also sort of sharing best practice and views from leaders of volunteers across the country. So we continued along that theme. So day one was all about volunteering and anti-racism and what it means to us as a sector. And we had Martha Awajobi from Charity So White giving her really amazing advice and very much challenging our thinking on how we address racism in our volunteer management sector. And then we also have volunteer managers giving us their personal thoughts of what this meant in their roles. And then there were loads and loads of other different workshops run by volunteer managers. So it was a really inspiring couple of days. We're just gathering the feedback now, but it seems like it went down really well.
You know, Sarah, until now, it was sounding like the Association of Volunteer Managers was a little bit like a national Leaders of Volunteers network that we have here in Nottingham, but it sounds like it's a heck of a lot more. Now, what would somebody here in Nottingham as a leader of volunteers get from becoming a member of AVM?
There's a whole range of things, several which I've mentioned so far. So you get discounts on all our AVMs and AVM events and conference. So we usually have 1, sometimes 2 events a month, which we're now running online. And they're live events, an opportunity to hear different speakers. We've done panel discussions. We're doing some action learning sets. So there's all sorts of things in those live events. We've also then got a library which is full of our past events, recorded conference presentations and things like that. We run a mentoring program that was new last year and it's been going down really well. So you were matched with a more experienced volunteer manager and you work with them to think about your career and where you want to go in volunteer management. Or even if you want to work through particular challenges you're having in your current role with your mentor, you can do that as well. We have other things like virtual book clubs and the AVM bite sizes I mentioned earlier. So there's loads of different resources and tools. We have discounts on AVM partners products. So people like volunteer management software and things like that. So yeah, it's really, really varied. But I guess, and this is the thing that will be similar to your organisation, is it's very much about that community. It's just about joining people up from across different sectors to share that learning. I think for me personally, that's the biggest benefit you get from the organisation.
That's fantastic. So if somebody here in Nottingham is interested, how do we find out more?
So there's 2 options. You can join as an individual member and it's quite low cost. So it's either 25 to 75 pounds, depending on your own individual circumstances. We also offer organisational membership, depends obviously on the size of the organisation. But if there are several of you in an organisation who want to join, then it's sometimes worthwhile doing that option. And it's also worth mentioning, you don't have to just work in volunteer management. So you might have a range of volunteers themselves who are coordinating other volunteers. So they also can join AVM and learn from other leaders of volunteers. So it doesn't matter if you're paid or unpaid. Or you can be a brand new to volunteer management, or you can be somebody like me who's been in the sector a fair old while. I guess all you need to do is go to our website, which is volunteermanagers.org.uk, and we've got all our joining options on there. And you can follow us on Twitter, which is at AVM Tweets.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Thanks very much for joining us, and well, have a very happy rest of International Volunteer Managers Day.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me.